Hi, my name is Kai Kennedy. I'm the Accessibility and Inclusion Training Specialist for Boston's Mayor's Commission for Persons with Disabilities, and this training is all about service dogs. In this presentation, we will review service animals and the rights of the handler, as well as how to acquire a service dog and so much more. So what is a service animal? The Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, defines service animals as any dog that is individually trained to perform tasks for the benefit of an individual with a disability. So this can include physical, sensory, psychiatric, cognitive, other body system related disabilities. Other species are not covered. So whether wild or domestic, trained or untrained, there are no other animals that can be considered a service animal with the exception of miniature horses. So some rights for service dogs include being permitted to go anywhere their handler is. So this means restaurants, doctor's offices, banks, buildings, basically anywhere their handler can go, with the exception of if there's a legitimate safety concern, like the sterile unit of a hospital or perhaps a construction site. Some quick service dog etiquette. So you should never distract a service dog by calling to it, petting it, or taking pictures of it. This can sometimes distract a service dog and cause them to miss a cue that can be life-threatening to their handler. Though these dogs are highly trained, they still make mistakes, and doing things like trying to distract it can definitely cause one of those mistakes. If you see a service dog laying next to, under, or on top of their handler, please do not disturb them. This dog is doing what it's trained to do. And if a service dog runs up to you, but you don't see their handler, follow the dog or find someone who can. They're likely trained to go find help if their handler is in danger and they are not able to help because they aren't trained to. So there's lots of different types of service dogs. They can be any breed, large, small, or in between, and they can help mitigate all different types of disabilities. So there are some service dogs who may only have one purpose, such as guide work or mobility work, but there are also multi-purpose service dogs that can help a handler with several disabilities mitigate all of them or some of them or most of them. Some very common tasks may include allergy or gluten detection, seizure alert or response, vision-related guide work, mobility work, and retrieval work. And some lesser-known tasks could be psychiatric episode response, alert, or interruptions, non-vision related guide work, and environment work. So non-vision related guide work would be, for example, if somebody is neurodivergent and they get overstimulated by being in a very crowded area and they're unable to navigate to a bathroom or the exit by themselves because of this overstimulation, their service dog can guide them to said places, bathroom, exit, etc. Environment work is similar, where if there is that same person who's neurodivergent may get overstimulated by large crowds and but they don't need the guide work, they might just need more space. There are a lot of service dogs who are trained to create space around their handler by either walking a circle around them, standing behind them to block other people from getting too close, things like that. Okay, so the big question that everyone has, how can you tell if a dog is a service animal? So as a public or private entity, there's the right to ask a handler two questions to confirm the validity of this service dog. So those questions are, is this a service dog required because of a disability? So the answer should be yes. And what work or task is this dog trained to perform? So some valid responses might be medical or psychiatric alert, guide tasks, alert to auditory stimulation, item retrieval. But again, this is not an all-inclusive list. There are lots of things that service dogs do. It's just important to remember that emotional support and personal protection are not considered trained tasks. So emotional support animals, which we'll talk about later, and personal protection dogs, a lot of times you'll see larger breeds like German Shepherds, they are not considered service dogs and those are not covered tasks. And fun fact, there's actually no paper, registry, certification, license, or vest required for service dogs. Some service dogs will even work without any sort of vest on. Most handlers do choose to put vests or harnesses or something to notify the public that they're a service dog, but it's not required by the ADA. And any sort of website that offers papers registries, licenses, anything like that, is not a valid, recognized form of documentation. There is no form of documentation recognized by the ADA. We know how to ask questions to see if it's a service dog, but what if somebody has all the right answers, and there's still a question that the service dog is not really acting like you would expect a service dog to? So, some things to consider. Service dog must be well groomed without any negative odor. They can't be covered in dirt, mud, have knotted fur or hair, and they also must be trained to relieve themselves outside, so not in within a building. And they always have to be under their handler's control. So they can't be pulling on the leash, barking or growling at people or other animals, jumping on people, sitting on chairs or benches in restaurants, running away from their handler, relieving themselves indoors. And we'll talk a little bit about some caveats to these in a second, but these are main things to remember. So if an alleged service dog is behaving in any of these ways or does not have a well-groomed appearance, the handler can be asked to leave. As a business, you can ask a handler to leave the premises with your dog. Alternatives, though, have to be offered. So, for example, if you are at a restaurant and you're asking somebody to leave or someone asks you to leave, there has to be an offer of something like takeout so that that person can still be served. They just can't bring the dog back onto the premise. So I mentioned there's a few exceptions. There are some service dogs that are trained to bark at or jump on their handler to alert them. This is a valid and trained task and would not be considered a reason to ask them to leave. Um, and there are also service dogs who are trained to leave their handlers to go find help or pull their handler through an environment. Again, this could look like they're running away from their handler, or it can look like they're pulling at the leash. But typically, you can tell the difference between, a guide dog who is pulling their handler through an environment, and a dog who just doesn't have proper leash etiquette. So, if you are seeing, a dog that has left their handler to go find help, or a dog that is pulling their handler through an environment to guide them, these are not considered valid reasons to ask them to leave. A question that a lot of people have is how to acquire a service dog. There's a lot of different ways. It really just depends on what time, money, and energy you have to be able to do this. So, the first and probably the most commonly known way would be program dogs. There are lots of programs through the US that provide service dogs through a training program. Most of these programs have lengthy wait lists. Some are free, some cost money. It just depends. The website assistancedoginternational.org does provide a list of many of the programs that are within not only the US but internationally. Again, these are not all of the programs that exist, but this gives a good foundation for some of the larger, more well-known service dog programs. Another option is to handler and train your dog. So this is a more affordable route than a program. Some handlers will choose to work with a local trainer to train a dog that they've selected. So they may have, a breeder or something of that nature who they've been on a wait list for. They purchase the dog, and then together with their handler, they work, or with their trainer rather, they work on training tasks, etiquette, and things like that. You can also completely handler train your dog. So if you don't have the money to hire a local trainer, you can train them yourselves. This is covered under the ADA. They do explicitly state that owner trainer, handler trained service dogs are valid. This is the least expensive option, but also the most time intensive. So because a lot of handlers are not super experienced dog trainers, it can take anywhere from 3+ years to have a dog that is fully trained and ready to task and work out in different environments. And then, of course, there's the option to purchase a bred dog or adopt one from a shelter. Again, both are valid. There's nothing in the ADA that says that you can't have a shelter dog and you must have a purebred poodle or whatever it is. But there are some kind of caveats to both. So shelter dogs are definitely less expensive. Obviously, adopting is much cheaper than buying, but they have a higher wash rate, which means they usually retire much sooner, if they even get to the point of being able to provide public assistance to their human. And this is because you cannot tell what the temperament of the dog is going to be due to genetics. A lot of shelter dogs are mixed breeds, and you don't really know for sure. You can bring somebody in to do a temperament test, but a lot of shelter dogs have a different temperament in the shelter than they do at home. So that's something to consider. And on the other side, a bred dog absolutely will cost more money. They are usually purebred and bred specifically for service work. So they have better success rates. Not to say that they don't still wash, but they do have better success rates. However, again, this is going to cost a lot more money than a shelter dog would. All right, so emotional support animals. These are animals that provide exactly what it sounds like, emotional support to a person with a disability. They do this just by their presence. So they aren't task trained or anything of that nature. They can be any sort of animal that is legally kept. So dogs, cats, birds, hamsters, fish. Some states that allow, exotic animals like snakes or hedgehogs, things like that, can also be emotional support animals within that state as long as it's legal. And just like service dogs, there's no registry or paper or certification or license for these animals. Some folks will choose to have their mental health care provider write some sort of a note or something of that nature. And we'll cover this kind of later on in the training, but specifically for housing purposes. But emotional support animals do not need to be trained to be considered as such. However, unlike service dogs, they are only permitted in pet-friendly public places. So if an area or an area of a park or a specific store or anything of that nature says no pets, a service dog could be allowed in that space, but an emotional support animal could not. Okay, so I said we talk about housing. These are other laws that service dog handlers may need to consider. The request for a service dog or emotional support animal in an otherwise no pet housing is considered a reasonable accommodation. So, landlord or property manager can ask similar two questions that we kind of reviewed earlier in the training. Does the tenant or prospective tenant have a disability? And does a tenant or prospective tenant require a service animal? So, if it's apparent why this person needs a service dog, the disability is readily apparent. So, for example, maybe they're a wheelchair user, their service dog helps retrieve items and things like that. Maybe they are blind or have low vision and they have a specific, a guide dog. You can't, those are pretty easy things to visibly see. However, if it's not apparent, so maybe it's a mental health disability or a physical disability that doesn't require full-time use of a mobility aid or even part-time use of a mobility aid, there can be documentation requested. They just cannot charge a pet fee or anything like that for having an ESA, emotional support animal or a service dog. So documentation might just look like a note from a doctor that says, yes, this person has a disability, and their dog helps to mitigate this disability, or yes, this person has a disability, their emotional service animal helps to mitigate that. After that, no further questions. They cannot ask for like a full write-up of your medical history or anything of that nature. Now, if the animal poses a direct threat to the health or safety of others that cannot be reduced by, a second reasonable accommodation, then the request may be denied. So this is again like if there's some sort of history of behavior that is aggressive or anything of that nature, this might be denied. However, having an allergy is not considered a direct threat, so that's important to keep in mind. And the request can also be denied if the landlord or property manager can prove that the animal would cause substantial damage to the property. And this is kind of harder to prove until after the fact. but it can be denied for that request can be denied for that reason. And you can find a lot more information on the Fair Housing Act at their website, www.hud.gov slash programs underscore offices slash fair underscore housing underscore equal underscore op slash assistance animals. Another law to consider for service dogs would be the Air Carrier Access Act. So, under this act or law, a service animal means a dog, regardless of breed or type, that is individually trained to do the work or perform tasks for an individual person with a disability. So it's very much just like the ADA. And again, disabilities covered would be physical, sensory, psychiatric, cognitive, any of the other disabilities. Airlines are permitted to deny transportation of a service dog if it violates safety requirements. So if the dog is too large or too heavy to be accommodated in the cabin, if it poses a direct threat to others' health or safety, if it causes a significant disruption within the cabin or airport gates or anywhere in the airport, violates any sort of health requirements, specifically like if it's prohibited from entering the US or a foreign country. They can also deny if the airline requires a completed Department of Transportation form, and this is not provided by the handler. And ways that airlines can determine whether an animal is a service animal or a pet by asking the established questions about disability and trained tasks, and also observing the behavior of the animal. Other indications might include leashes, harnesses, or vests, but then again, keep in mind, none of these things are required by the ADA or any other law. They're just often things that handlers will choose to put on their animal to make it easier for others to identify. So this act may also require one, a U.S. Department of Transportation form attesting to the animal's health, behavior, and training. So it might include, who was a trainer or how many hours was this dog trained, etc. And then two, a U.S. Department of Transportation form attesting that the animal can either relieve itself um, or cannot relieve itself in a sanitary manner, especially if the animal is going to be on a flight that is 8 hours or more. So lots of dogs are potty trained and do a great job, but that 8 hours or more flight, so like overseas, things like that, it has to be, your dog has to be trained well enough to only relieve themselves in designated areas with either within the airport or outside of it. Airlines are not permitted to require other documentation from service dog users or service animal users except to comply with requirements on transport of animals by federal agency, a U.S. territory, or foreign jurisdiction. So again, they're not going to ask you for an extensive write-up of your entire medical history from birth until the time that you received your service dog. And for more information on things like this, you can visit the website www.transportation.gov/individuals/aviation consumer protection service animals. And this has been our brief training on service animals. You can visit the ADA website to learn lots more about them. If you want to learn more about disability accessibility, you can contact our office, the Mayor's Commission for Persons with Disabilities, Boston City Hall, room 967. And our phone number is 617 635 3682. Our email is disability@boston.gov. And if you visit our website, boston.gov/disability, and scroll to the bottom of the page, you can find information on our newsletter, which will help to keep you up to date on more trainings and activities, events, etc., that we host